Hello and welcome to the Green Lectionary Podcast, a production of Creation Justice Ministries. Green Lectionary is a conversation for preachers looking at Scripture through the lens of creation justice. My name is Derek Weston, and today we will be looking at a text for Palm Sunday. My guest today is Reverend Cray Haynes. Caleb is the author of Earthbound Christian, Flourishing Within Limits in the Age of Infinite Growth. He's also the host of the Eco-Christian podcast and the director of Nazarenes for Creation Care. Along with his other roles, Caleb is also a member of the Creation Justice Ministries board and had a crucial role in the development of this year's annual resource. This year's resource is The Canopy of Creation, Trees, Faith, and the Work of Justice. In it, we explore issues of tree cover as a justice issue and explore the ways that trees show up in Scripture. The resource contains sermon starters, worship resources, advocacy guides, and material to engage kids. You can download the resource at creationjustice.org/canopy of creation. Join us now as we look at Matthew 21 through the lens of creation justice. All right, so I'm here with Caleb Cray Haynes, and Caleb is, among many of his hats, he is one of the board members for Creation Justice Ministries, and he has a new book out called Earthbound Christian, Flourishing Within Limits in the Age of Infinite Growth. So Caleb, let's start with talking about the title of your book, Earthbound Christian. Like, where did the title come from, and what kind of drew you to thinking about what it means for us to be earthbound Christians?
Yeah. What's up? Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Derek. It's a lot of fun. Yes. The title, if anyone has ever tried to title anything, you already know. And it's like they're always
Yes.
like, people don't judge book by their covers. And it's like, no, that's exactly how this works. And so sleepless nights and all that stuff. And so there's a journey. I think originally my first title, or one of the first titles, I think, was Finite Theology, and kind of like trying to frame that, and then ended up going from there to actually, I think maybe when I first was chatting with you about this, I don't know if you remember, but I had another title that was like Bounded for Good. But there was, and then realizing like bounded may or may not be a real English word. And and then I think that just added confusion, but there was a little play, which I'm kind of that guy. Like my one of my other books is Garbage Theology, right? And so I'm like, I like the play, but I realize you gotta straight shoot it. And so I ended up with Earthbound Christian, and really just wrestling with, this juxtaposition between, we usually think about being heaven bound as Christians, and we're sort of unpacking the frame from that, I'm going to say, direction. And so, but really so much of the movement and the energy and the theology, right, and the biblical theology that really arrives for us when we look at creation care is our tether to the earth, which is all in there. I mean, it's all over the place. And we're constantly talking about salvation being cosmic and all of that. And so really Earthbound just seemed like the place to go, and the right sort of connection to kind of make. And so what does it mean that we're not only heaven bound but also earthbound, right? People who are, I think the first sort of scripture quote, the epigraph, like right on the front, is like the two from the two different creation counts, right? From Genesis 1, it's like God created in God's image humanity, right? And then of course, the second account, Genesis 2, like where it says God creates the Ha Adam, the human, from the earth, and so that you have both. And so I think that there's so much there, and anyway, I could chatter on, but yeah, yeah. So that's kind of a little bit about kind of where that came from, and really just
Wow.
trying to poke at all these holes of like, hey, what does it mean to be earthbound and Christian, and that these are things that go together.
Yeah, I really love that. One of the things that I so appreciated, like, diving into your book, was that you name a lot of the challenges of, like, the perfectionism that kind of comes with thinking about ecological things, the like ways that we can get it wrong. I feel like there's a lot of just like very confessional stuff here of like, yeah, I'm not doing this perfectly. There, you talk about you feel hypocrisy, like all of these things that really are, for me, they feel like really good entry points to like let people know that the perfectionism that sometimes feels like it's built into ecological spaces is not your
Mhm.
starting point. And what I'm just kind of curious as to like why was that important for you, like as a starting point, to have sort of the, hey, we're all just human, we're all just trying to figure this
Mhm.
thing out, and none of us gets it totally right. Like, why was that
Yeah.
important for you?
I really feel like that's sort of the thing underneath the thing with the entire book, which is, hey, what does it mean to be human here? That's all tied into it. What does it mean to be limited, finite, earthy people? And one of the people I've really been sort of looking up to here, who I think is just having great similar conversations, not necessarily ecologically, but is Kate Bowler. And if you
Mm,
follow any of Kate Bowler's work, it's raw
mhm,
and it's like messy hair don't care, and it's just a very, very vulnerable and authentic. And I think, to me, like I was like, man, we need like an ecological Kate Bowler situation here, like for the people of God to really wrestle with our humanity and the frustrations of all of this because I think our temptation is to mask. Our temptation is to overcome and to try to work our way and climb our way out
mm,
of this environmental situation. And sort of one of the big things I'm scratching at here, or we're scratching at, maybe is all right. What if actually the greatest solutions are not like out there, but down here, within our humanity, within the rawness, within the authenticity. And so, yeah, especially those first couple of chapters of the book, I found myself it is very confessional, and that kind
mm.
of runs throughout of like, which was kind of hard in some ways to just be like, yeah, I have been an eco bully probably at some point, unbeknownst to me. And like, and I even tell a story about how that totally trickled down to our kids, and they were like eco shaming this guy in his yard one time, and we had to, we were like, that's not okay, and just all the frustrations of being in someone's home, like a friend, and just having that sort of internal, like if you've been carrying your green cross for a while. I don't know if I'm allowed to
Mm.
say that. This is the Green Lectionary podcast,
Absolutely.
but
No, please.
your green cross, then you step into spaces and you're hyper aware. You're just hyper aware of the footprint of all of it, and so you're bringing that with you, and so yeah, I talk about a lot of that in the book, and sort of wrestle with some of those questions and a lot of how that it's posed for a lot of people, which is, hey, if you want to care for the earth, you better start getting rid of everything you enjoy or love. And it's so, yeah, there's, like, let's just name that might not be a helpful way
Mhm.
in.
Yeah.
There could be some truth there, but we've got to sort of name some of these things. And so, yeah, I kind of try to have a little fun with that and also kind of be a little raw.
Mm. And I appreciate both the vulnerability, the rawness, and the humor. I mean, like this was a I was saying before we started recording, this was such a fun book to read. Like I think there is a way in which you are doing some really invitational work,
Mhm.
both with your vulnerability and with your humor, where you're trying to, it feels like, lower the bar to entry for people so that like it doesn't feel like such a barrier for people of faith, particularly for people of faith who maybe have not heard these conversations in church a lot, to find what their entry point is into this conversation. That's
Mhm.
that's really what it feels like is kind of the big invitation for this book.
Yeah, I think, you can almost name any political tension or anything that's going on right now and find that in places where we can laugh together, we can come
Mm,
together in a lot of ways, or at least we can sort of lower the heat in the room. And but honestly, a whole 'nother confession, like, I have a hard time not joking, and which gets me in all sorts of trouble in real life pastoral situations. But like, it's just hard to turn that part of my brain off. And so this book in particular, I kind of decided just to like let the nozzle open up a little bit more for for the sake of like for the sake of the book and just for the sake of like just trying to be like, like authentic as well. But also as like, yeah, I think like we have to be willing to laugh our way into this and cry our way into this if that's what it means. And so we need the whole spectrum of emotions here if we're gonna find our way forward in these crises. And so yeah, I really enjoy just sort of yeah, trying to draw out some of the absurdities. And I think
Mm,
that's sort of the thing when we talk about, if listeners are familiar with the term the Anthropocene, right?
mm,
Which, is the geological age that we call that what we live in. But, I think it's just a cascade of absurdities when we really think about it, like laughable absurdities. And, I referenced the John Green book, The Anthropocene Reviewed, where he gives 5-star ratings to different things like Mario Kart and Piggly Wiggly. And, and I think, yes, all of that. This is all just absurd. But you kind of have to step back and see it for what it is to realize that and just kind of laugh at it as well. I think that is also a way in that we need is to be able to do some of that and sort of recognize the absurdity of it. And I think I mean, that's a whole kind of separate conversation, but I think you see places in the gospel where Jesus does that as
mm,
well, where he says something or does something or tells his disciples to do something. And almost the only way you can make sense of that text is if you're thinking like Jesus is smiling,
mm,
Jesus having a good laugh on the inside because he sees the absurdity of it.
mm.
Like, hey, go down and try to grab that coin out of this fish's mouth. And then, like, you're like, this is absolutely absurd. Anyway, sorry, I going
Yeah,
on.
no,
Yes.
it's good. It's good. I will say when I first got the book and I just kind of like, doing your my first initial flip through and I like see the word jabronis and I'm like, wow, okay, this is like totally tuning into my 90s pro wrestling watching
Yeah.
self.
Yes.
And so I that was like actually the first section of the book I read. I just laughed my head off. And I was
Yes.
like, okay, this is gonna be something that is enjoyable for people to read. And they're gonna like I think you're absolutely right, especially around these topics. We get so serious. It's so everything feels so dire. Everything feels so apocalyptic. And like I honestly feel that we need joy to like move the needle forward. And so
Mhm.
I just appreciated you doing that.
Mm,
One last thing before we move on to our text. There's a really fascinating idea that is in your book, and it's actually kind of embedded in the subtitle, Flourishing Within Limits in the Age of Infinite Growth. And you're really talking about an economy that is built to say that we can grow forever. Everything can get bigger. We can always like we can expand GDP forever. But you actually kind of bring up the idea that limitations are a form of love, that like one of the ways that God shows God's love to us is through limitation, putting limits on us. And
mhm,
I just found that like absolutely like and I like my immediate leap was like to parenting. Like
mhm,
absolutely like that is like the initial way that when you have a first crawler or a first walker.
mhm.
Man, like the way that you immediately say "I love you" to that kid is putting some limitations on them. And I'm just
Yeah.
I'm just wondering like how you have been wrestling with this idea of thinking about limitations. We often think of limitations as limitations are a bad thing. I mean, you've really reframed that idea of limitations. And I'm just kind of wondering
Mhm.
like where that idea has come from for you and how you see that.
Yeah, yeah, that's a big one. And honestly, even though it's called Earthbound Christian, kind of the central image that I return to throughout the book is the moon,
Mm,
and this as kind of like a symbol of gravity's work upon us and how we like would not survive without the moon and we would not survive without gravity, and just posing this question like what if gravity is love,
mm,
at work in the universe, keeping all this together. And meanwhile, if you can trace humanity's work in over the last few hundred years, it's just a constant can I overcome gravity? Can
mm,
we unlock the next door? And it gets a little weedy because you're kind of weeding through like, well, we're created to create. We're created to want to do that, want to create in the image of the creator. But at the same time, what here is like us eating the forbidden fruit? Like what here is us, you know, really chasing after the idolatry, the ego, the Tower of Babel, right? Climbing so high that we might actually destroy ourselves,
mm.
and really sort of pulling at a lot of those threads in the book. And so I think that this discussion on limitations and embracing our limitations is huge, and it is everywhere. It's kind of one of those lenses that when you see it, it's everywhere, and I do think it's a key thread to pull on in the wake of, yeah, all aspects of our lives, but especially like yeah, you named it, the economic drivers that are really, a lot of people think, oh, the main issue is climate change, but no, the main issue is what's driving climate change and all of these other crises, which is the worship of, what many call growthism,
Mm.
and that God is growth, and in that regard. And so, yeah, I think that there's a lot for us to think about theologically and ecclesially in our spaces that the church really hasn't, spent a lot of time on here. And so, yeah, yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up because I think that's a big one.
Yeah. Well, I just really appreciate the what feels like to me this really safe on ramp into some of these big questions about what it means to be connected to the earth, understanding our limitations, and understanding how we live in better relationship with God's creation in a way that feels, like I said, very invitational. So I'm really grateful for you and your work and for this book. It feels like a gift.
Right on, man. Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate you saying on ramp too. And I know that's something we chatted about briefly, but this a lot of people have pulled on these threads, in a lot more systematic way and done some really robust work out there. Obviously, like Dr. Norma Wiersbe, Deborah Reinstein, so several others with their work. And so I wanted to do something that kind of like you were saying that felt like it was accessible, and maybe a middle ground for people who haven't got into any of this before. And so
Yeah. Well, let's shift gears a little bit, and so we're going to be talking about a passage for Palm Sunday. We'll be looking at Matthew's version of the story of the Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. So I'm going to read Matthew chapter 21, verses 1 to 11. When they had come near Jerusalem and had reached Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, just say this: the Lord needs them, and he will send them immediately." This took place to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet. Tell the daughter of Zion, look, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey. The disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and put their cloaks on them, and he sat on them. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and that followed were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest heaven!" When he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was in turmoil, asking, "Who is this?" The crowds were saying, "This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee." So,
Mhm.
Caleb, where is creation in this passage?
Man, it would. It would almost be harder to find where creation is not in this passage. I mean, this is one of the things I love about Palm Sunday is that it's this moment where, people are actually bringing branches into the sanctuary that, we don't do often enough. Honestly, I feel like there should be like, just bring different, how can we get more trees in the sanctuary? But, there are even did the mention, obviously, with the Mount of Olives, that's always sort of the defining characteristic there, but obviously the cult and the branches and the people and, there's so much there, and even I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, I'm probably not, but, I'm gonna continually double dip into Luke's version, which I'm sure is crazy off limits for this podcast, but
It's
the
not.
the the stones, that he talks about in Luke's version, and so, if we're just talking very practically, and obviously this road into Jerusalem. Yeah, I think there's so much there. What are you
Yeah.
seeing?
Well, I think what's important is, and I'm actually glad that you mentioned Luke's version because what happens, I think for folks who are regular church attenders and kind of expect sort of the Palm Sunday message, they're conflating every version of the gospel
Mm,
when in their minds. Like they're conflating the version that says, if these are quiet, then the rocks will cry out. And
mm,
they're all of the images of every version of this gospel is coming through for people when they hear the story. And so I think it's actually
mhm,
really good to to recognize that, like, while we might just have this one text in front of us, for those of us who know this story, we're going to have all of the versions kind of, some would say harmonized. I don't know that it's supposed to be harmonized. I'd say it's more of a jumble than a harmony. But one of the things that for me is just, I I love the idea that the animals in this passage, the donkey and the colt, I love the idea of them having a vocation. That, like, the Lord has need of them, and like the Lord had something intentional for them to do. And we don't often, I guess this is kind of like one of the evolutions of thought that's happening for me in doing this work, is starting to think about, like, so often we think about our own human vocations and that God has plans for our life, and thinking about God having plans for the more than human world. And like, it's very
mhm,
clear here that God has plans, and plans that the humans don't necessarily understand
mhm,
for the more than human world here, particularly this donkey and this colt. And I just kind of love that. Like, there's something kind of humbling that, like, the disciples go and get the donkey and the colt, but like,
mhm,
this isn't really a disciple story. Like, this isn't really, as like, they're not the stars of this show. With the exception of Jesus, the humans aren't the star of the show. The star of the show are the animals who are ushering Jesus in, and they get to be the transport for Jesus coming into the city. And I just I
mm,
love to think that, you know God having God's own purposes that God understands, that maybe we don't, for the more than human world.
yeah,
And that is, again, that's a more recent thought I've been playing with.
mm,
But I just I love it because it's kind of humbling.
mm,
Kind of puts, like, it kind of right sizes our relationship to the rest of creation in some ways. So that's one of the things
yeah.
that I'm seeing in the story as I read it. I've read the story a million times, but as I'm reading it now, that's kind of what's bubbling up to the surface for me.
My gosh, bro. I could go, I think, all day on, like, different things that are firing right now. But yeah, there's just so many things. And, we so recently, my family got a dog, and so we're like dog people now. And, I grew up with a dog, but, like, we only till recently have we probably had one since then with my kids, and it's just kind of you cross a you get to know an animal more intimately, and
Mm.
I think anyway, all that to say, I think animal lovers really light up on some of these texts more than others because there's a familiarity to it,
Mm.
and I think that there's a lot to play with here, I guess is what I'm saying. There's around 3 times a year when you might get some animals in the sanctuary, like Feast of St. Francis, and the Nativity, and for some of those extracurriculars, you'll get some people bringing in some donkeys or colts or something with this text here. And where I grew up in near Columbia, Tennessee, the first weekend in April every year is Mule Day, and so
Mm.
there's almost some Palm Sunday or Easter Sunday overlap every time around that weekend, and so
Oh, I
there's
love
just
that.
people are bringing in mules, and so and I think that does. I love this sort of play here with what do the animals know and what do the animals teach
Mm.
us, and are we even open to that?
Mhm.
And, having some sort of whiplash to Narnia in the back of my head right now, thinking about, how Lewis was so careful to, animate the animals, especially the horses and things like that. And just in the same way we have conversations, or like Robin Wall Kimmerer will have a conversation around, the animation of the more than human world. And anyway, I'm sort of meandering here, but, no, I do think that there's a lot of play here for preachers
Mhm.
to think about, and I mean, I'm thinking right now about all that we're learning around how even whales communicate and
Mhm.
how doggone intelligent apparently they are, and all that sort of playing into this again, this kind of maybe like absurd scene, kinda like the fish where Jesus it's not a miracle moment, but it is
Mhm.
also a text in which we realize we have like a hint of the divinity of Christ, of Jesus, where he says, "Go here, there's a man, there's a place, there's a donkey, bring it to me," kind of
Mhm.
thing. And yeah, yeah, yeah. What is going on here? And so, uh, yeah, what is the plan?
Yeah.
And yeah, I do think it's beautiful. It really is beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can't help, you talk about you talked about absurdity when we are talking about your book, and I can't help but think about this scene. Anytime I imagine this scene, I just kind of imagine this full-grown man on the colt of a donkey looking like kind of ridiculous.
Mhm.
That like the like that this scene, like Jesus looks kind of ridiculous coming into
Yeah.
the city.
Yeah.
And again, there's always in more recent years there's been, this idea that this is kind of happening maybe in concert with a Roman parade that would have had war horses coming into the
Mhm.
city of Jerusalem, and like how majestic and powerful people can
Mhm.
look when they're riding this like incredibly powerful horse, and
Mhm.
contrasting that with Jesus riding like, you know, feet
Yeah.
dragging on the ground on,
Yeah, yeah. He's basically
on the
walking along. Yeah, yeah. Uh,
I don't know, maybe in my mind it's sillier than it
Maybe it's a
actually
bigger
was,
cult.
but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How big is this cult? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and this idea, I know a lot of commentators write how, maybe this is how a king would come in times of peace is
Mm,
on the
mm,
cult, you know, which I'm curious about, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on as well. And I don't know, just the whole king motif as well, which is
mm,
pretty, it's pretty in there. I feel like with a lot of Palm Sunday preaching, but also just kind of holding that in place with a lot of conversations, I think that you and I are probably in with creation care and stuff. Like we're constantly kind of moving away, trying to move more toward kingdom rather than kingdom,
mhm,
and I'm wondering, is that here?
mm.
And yeah.
It's that's interesting. Like, I don't know that I've heard too much about the idea of this being the way that kings would come into a town in peacetime. But but wow, doesn't that make sense, right? Like, doesn't that make sense that the Prince of Peace comes into the city on the beast that represents what a king would be riding in peacetime? That like
Mhm.
Jesus is kind of coming into this city saying, like, I'm not coming here with swords and shields and armor. I'm coming here with this ragtag group of people on this cult because my kingdom, the version of kingdom that I'm ushering in, is one that's peaceful, and one where we're laying our weapons down, and one where we're building community, and one where we're including people.
Mm.
uh and so this humble animal and this humble parade, kind of is emblematic of the kind of king that
Mhm.
Jesus intends to be.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what I'm always scratching here. I feel like, especially with this Palm Sunday text, and speaking of my book, one of my last chapters is called "Jesus Drives a Station Wagon," and I don't remember, I don't remember if I talk about this text or not, but it is embedded in there for me of like this humility that is essential for this kind of work and the kind of kingdom that Jesus is building and is about, and this kind of movement that Jesus is a part of. And but I am continually thoughtful here, and to be honest, we kind of like the political season that we're marinating in here.
Mm,
I'm going to say, especially in North America, is one where I think we're awfully tempted or awfully really desire for I'm gonna say Christians desire on both sides of the aisle for Jesus to get on the horse.
mm, mm.
And so I feel like Palm Sunday kinda confronts us all over again of like, doggone it, like, well, what does that mean that Jesus, well, yeah, I guess, again this year he's on the donkey, and and so, it's like Palm Sunday. The Palm Sunday gets in the lectionary every doggone it year and confronts us all over again. Every year, every year, he
Chooses the horse.
always on the donkey, and it's baked into the lectionary for us to
Yeah.
remember what we're doing here.
Oh, that's so good. I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, man, there is, and you're right. It's on both sides because, like, there's the clear Christian nationalism side that is so full of, you know triumphalism and militarism and all that sort of stuff. But there's also those of us on the more progressive side that's just kind of like, Jesus, get on the horse and stop this.
Mm,
Like,
mm,
but at the same time, I'm actually kind of thinking about, and kind of goes into our second question of like, how are humans interacting with the created world here? But I'm thinking about some of the images that are coming out of Minneapolis, of like and in Portland, Oregon, of like people dressing up like frogs, and like the like huge. I've seen so many people like in these like very
mm.
uh
Yeah, the
ornate, silly suits
the
that, like,
unicorns.
unicorns and dinosaur suits and things like that, where it's just kind of like the way to push back against this ugly
Mhm,
militarism is with whimsy and humor and humility, and like kind of these like very non-military images. Yeah, that kind of that it kind of feels like
mhm,
that brings me into that space of like, we're not gonna beat, you know
mm.
Christian nationalism with Jesus on a horse.
Yes, yes, absolutely. It makes me think of a little bit left field, maybe, but way back in the day, reading Shane Claiborne, and his Irresistible Revolution, when he
Mhm.
tells the story about how I think they were having like church with a lot of people experiencing homelessness in this park, and the police were like wanting to give them the boot, and so they decided, or they couldn't feed people. I think that's what it was. And so he decided, well, we won't have a meal, we'll have communion, we'll have Eucharist. And
Mm,
if they want to come in here and bust up our big Eucharist moment here with all these they're going to have to they're going to have to they're going to have to come in here with clubs during the sacrament, and
mm,
that's how they're gonna have to do this, and so, yeah, it kinda reminds me, of, like, man, yeah, how can we turn the other cheek? How can we see this, do that sort of, like, getting on our own cults as well, right?
mhm,
Good Friday, you carry your cross. Palm Sunday, you get on the cult, and
mm,
so what does that look like for us,
mm.
I guess, so sorry, there's a train just going nuts in the background for me, so that's,
I can just barely hear it, so it's
yeah,
a
get on the train, yeah.
but I think that's such a such a good image though, is like, you know, the need there's an element of peaceful protest
Mm,
that has always kind of been baked into this Palm Sunday story, right? Like this is sort of a counter parade, kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Gosh, words and things. But
mm,
it's sort of it's this countercultural absurd. It kind of comes back to
yeah,
absurdity, right? Like
yeah.
it's kind of this. Boy, I really am struggling for a particular word that is not coming to me
No,
right now. And like
I
I
feel like
hate
I
when
know where
this
you're going
happens,
though, yeah. There's a
but
word, yeah.
there's a word, and I'm struggling for it. But it's this covert, like, almost insurgent kind of pushback against what's happening in this occupied territory. Like, let's not forget, like, this is an
Mhm.
occupied territory. And, I think that, like, there's going to be a lot for preachers to work with this particular Palm Sunday as we think about what does it look like to push back against militaristic forces in our occupied cities.
Yes,
Jesus gives us a lot to work with here.
yeah,
And then I think the invitation to bring creation into our protest, right? Bring the more than human world into our protest, whether that's in the form of branches or in the form of donkey and colt. Bring the more than human world into our pushing back against this militarism. I think there's a lot here for
yeah.
Palm Sunday for preachers who are connecting some of these dots here.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I want to say, I know in Nashville, I think Palm Sunday, right now, as this is coming out, I think we're looking at the end of, yeah, like March 29th.
Mhm.
And I know, I'm pretty sure there's no King's protest on the 28th.
Yeah.
And it does, it does really, and I know we have all sorts of listeners here, and I'm not, you know, throwing hats one way or another, but like it is something to marinate on of like, as God's people, like looking at this text, entering Holy Week, wow, there is quite a bit to pray about here in the
Mhm.
way of what are we doing as the people of God in this time? And yeah, in the the cosmic nature of it all as well, that I think that all the aspects of creation that are sort of drawing into I feel like, well, what do we believe is happening this week,
Mm.
for all of creation, but
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. So I think we're dancing around it. We're kind of dancing around the edges of it. But where is there a call to action for the church here, as we think about this text, as we think about it, what it means in not just the climate changed world that we live in, but also sort of the particular political moment that we live in.
mm, yeah. That is the question. Yeah, no. Uh, I'm still kinda stuck, now my brain's going, other places on the last thing, which I guess it's all kind of the same question. But the thing that we didn't talk about, which is the obvious one, which is the branches, and I would just point out
Mm.
briefly because our annual Creation Justice Ministries resource this year's is the Canopy of Creation. We're
Mhm.
very there's just so much goodness there, and we've just been thinking trees for a while now. But
It's
and
true.
so that's one of the first things that jumped out to me when we look at this passage is it says they
Mm.
cut the branches and laid them down on the road. Like they literally roll out the green carpet for Jesus with these with these branches and I just wonder if that's not a helpful way in as well
Mm.
as thinking about action in the way of engaging our people, in the spring in
Mm.
care of creation as a physical manifestation and embodiment f- for your congregation to participate in as a in this time and this season. I mean, pollinator gardens are protests in a
Mm.
way.
Mhm.
And I think we could think about that in a lot of different modes of like are are bringing creation in some aspect as a form of establishing, you know, God's created order on earth. Yeah, and so I think, I think, yeah, I'm tempted to not, feel like the preachers need to kind of marinate on some of that for their different congregations. But yeah, I'm curious what's standing out to you here
Mm.
in that way.
I mean, I think there's for me there's a call to think about what does it look like for us to one, I think where you started is invite creation into worship. Like that's where we kicked off the conversation is like this is the one time a year where like we kind of get a blank check to invite creation into worship. And this is actually I think an invitation to maybe not so much worship in creation, but worship with creation. That like creation also has some agency in worship here. And there's an invitation here to worship with creation, which is a little bit of what's going on with the branches, a little bit of what's going on with the donkey and the colt.
Mm,
But I also think that there's a little bit of I think like you just said, and I could not agree more that things like pollinator gardens are resistance, right? And that like one of the ways we push back against the machine and the mechanization is with the organic and with the real, with the natural, with the created, right? I'm gonna go on such a weird tangent, and I apologize, but like here's here's what my brain is doing right now. A couple weeks ago, my younger son and I watched the original Star Wars trilogy. I mean, we've both seen it. I've seen it a million times. He's seen it a bunch of times, but he hadn't watched it in a while, and he wanted to watch it with me. And one of the things that I've kind of always noticed about Return of the Jedi is you have this very mechanized empire. And the thing that ultimately leads to their downfall are these earthbound fuzzy creatures called Ewoks that like they use the trees around them to fight back. They use the stones around them to fight back.
yes.
They like it's all creation, like all of the creation of Endor
Yes.
fighting back against this empire. And like
Yes.
I don't like again, I maybe just kind of where my mind and heart are these days. Like there was like, and I've always been one of those people who was like, I don't know, I can kind of take or leave the Ewoks. Like, man, I was feeling the Ewoks the last time we watched it, and I
Yes.
was like, yeah, that's exactly
Yes.
what we need.
All of it. All of it. You know, I love that you brought that up because one of the this is so obscure, but one of the movies I watched repeatedly growing up that we like taped off the television. It was like a
Mm,
ABC special one Saturday night in 1991. but it was Ewoks Battle for Endor. Like, if you've ever, like,
I
Ewoks
have seen
have
that.
their own
Yes.
feature films, and we 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 do like pizza movie night, and we watched that first one with my youngest daughter. I don't know where my oldest one was. She escaped. But we watched it, and my youngest daughter Daily like fell in love with it, and it totally like reshaped her birthday party and everything. And I was like, "Yes, Wicket," which is the name of the little Ewok. Yeah, it is like that, and I think, and actually that's one of the things in my book that I keep trying to bring up is there's a lot of this is sort of baked into the greatest story ever told, I'm gonna
Mm,
say, right? This is what bubbles to the surface and everything from Jurassic Park to The Lord of the Rings. This is like that humility thing, that underdog
mhm,
aspect that we're so drawn to in sort of the hero narrative of man, we love it when the humble comes out on top, and Jesus is like, "Yeah, wink, wink. The first shall be last, and the meek will inherit the earth."
yeah.
And yeah, that's not just like good movies. That's like part of what we're doing here. That's part of what's unfolding within the created order is that the moment we forget I'm going to say our place, which sounds very like grandfatherly, like don't forget your place, know your role, jabroni, the whole thing. But that's when we lose the plot. That's when we lose the
Mm,
plot and we forget. And one of the threads that I end up pulling out with the whole gravity thing is like, man, like one of the things where you see, I'm going to say gravity within scripture is this sort of like when people fall down to worship, like they
mm,
actually fall on their knees, and I think that is the posture thing. I think in this you have this moment where Jesus shows up in the most humble way for this Passover feast, and he's greeted with all these people in just this cool worship scene. They're crying out, "Save us, Hosanna." Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty special, tender,
mhm,
like, place there, and I think that, and it is vulnerable, and we know that because, right, Jesus only lived another week, and then 3 days he came back, but yeah, it's like, yeah, and that in that segment, that's everything right there,
yeah.
in the life, death, and resurrection, and so, yeah. Mm.
Yeah, it's good. And like I think the other thing that I just as we're wrapping up here, one of the things that I kind of love about this is that in Matthew's version, when he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was in turmoil, asking, "Who is this?" That like what was happening was confusing. What was happening didn't make sense. Like this is the big deal. The big deal is coming in the city riding on on a donkey and
Yeah,
like having like fishermen and like
yeah,
the poor and the humble people like throw branches at his feet. Like this is the this is the hero.
yeah,
What?
yeah, right, yeah, yeah, exactly. It's why the stormtroopers didn't take the Ewoks seriously. And, it's like, "No, this is the real deal." And, yeah, yeah. Who is this? Yeah, I love that question that through the tellings, this question remains of like, uh, what is going on here? And the sort of commentary lore of like, oh, supposedly, when kings come in peace, and it's supposedly because did kings ever come in peace?
Mm,
And now look, this one, the king, right, we would say is coming in peace here. And so, yeah, that's
I
good.
love that. I love that. It's a good place for us to end. Caleb, thank you so much. Earthbound Christian, Flourishing Within Limits in the Age of Infinite Growth. Thank you for your book. Thank you for this conversation. Just really glad to know you and get to do all kinds of cool work with you. So thanks,
Yeah,
man.
man. So much fun.
Thank you for joining us for the Green Lectionary Podcast. This episode was produced by Sprocket Wagner, and the song within these pages was written and produced by Christian McIver. can learn more about this and other programs of Creation Justice Ministries at creationjustice.org.
Our story comes alive within these pages, for every time and place throughout the ages. God speaks and is heard, and the enduring word calls us to care for our world as we share the love that can set creation free. Restoring the earth to wholeness, peace, and harmony. Let the songs of the water, land, and sky resound, 'cause together we're all bound within these pages. There's always new life to be found.